The Houston Texans finished the 2022 regular season with a 3-13-1 record and missed the playoffs for the third straight season. It was a bad year from start to finish as they started the year with a tie to the Colts, then ended the year with a win over the Colts, which ultimately cost them the number 1 overall draft pick. They ended up taking Ohio State's CJ Stroud at number 2 overall and even traded up to number 3 to acquire Alabama's Will Anderson. And when you clicked to watch this video, you knew heading into it that Houston is not going to be competing for a Super Bowl this year. Not with a rookie quarterback and not with a team that's accumulated just 11 wins since the start of the decade. And unfortunately for the Texans and their fan base, the most wins they've racked up in a season so far in the 20s is 4. And while it's been an extremely tough start to the decade for the Texans, they had one of the biggest wins out of anybody this offseason when they brought in a former Texan player by the name of DeMeco Ryans to be their next head coach. And I'm going to be honest, out of the head coaching jobs that were available this offseason, and given how sought after DeMeco was as a head coach this offseason, I was shocked when he accepted the Texans job. But I think that's the start of good things to come for the Houston Texans. Granted, it's going to be a few years, but the Texans will eventually rise, and it starts with the 2023 season and ultimately the 2023 season preview. Now let's begin. And we are starting today's video by discussing something that can only get better in 2023 compared to 2022, and that's how much opponents ran the football on the Texans last year. The Texans' run defense was awful, as they finished 32nd in rushing yards allowed and 31st in rushing touchdowns allowed, as they allowed a whopping 31 touchdowns on the ground last year. And I know the immediate thought is going to be, well, no shit, because they were not a good team, and once teams got up by 10 points, they would just pound the rock and milk the clock and essentially try to preserve a win. And while that was true in some cases, yes, and I'm not shying away from that, they finished 29th in yards per carry as they allowed an average of 5.1 yards per carry defensively. And offensively, they averaged just 3.7 yards per carry, which was ahead of only Tampa, and when you can't run the ball or stop the run, this is not shocking, of course, but it's going to be a very long year. This team had 7 double-digit losses in 2022, and I don't want to say only 5, but in 5 of those 7 losses, teams ran for more than 100 yards, which is to be expected. But there were only 2 games last year in which the Texans allowed 100 yards or less rushing on the ground, and they were in double-digit losses. And it should not come as a surprise that when you only have 3 wins over the course of a 17-game season, you probably turned the ball over a lot and you probably didn't effectively run or pass the ball. And in the Texans' case, it was both. And there were 2 games last year where the Texans had 161 yards or less of offense, and in both games, they not surprisingly lost. And that's going to be a big difference this year is, yes, rookie quarterback CJ Stroud will have his bonehead plays and his welcome to the NFL moments, but I think CJ is going to be good enough as a rookie to elevate this offense from the basement to at least halfway up the stairs to the main level of the house, if you will. Meaning, I don't think there's going to be a game against the Titans, at home by the way, where they throw for 118 yards and run for 43 yards over the course of an entire game. And by the way, with the improvements they made on defense as well, I would be very surprised if the Texans have any games this year like that Week 8 game against Tennessee, where they allow over 300 yards rushing defensively. And I don't know the win percentage off the top of my head, but in the history of the NFL, if you rush for over 300 yards as a team, I would imagine the winning percentage is well into the 90s. And one thing that actually may surprise you about the 2022 Houston Texans, and I mean this in a good way, is they finished 5th in turnovers defensively. Yes, they finished 2nd to last offensively in turnovers, and they put their defense in bad situations quite a bit, but the defense could create turnovers, and we saw that quite often. And in the final 6 games of the year last year, they created not just one, but multiple turnovers in every single game. This was in the stretch where they nearly beat the Cowboys, and anybody who had Dallas money line for that game remembers it quite well because they were sweating it a lot more than they initially thought they would have, and they also took the Chiefs, the Super Bowl winning Chiefs, to overtime in this stretch. I know NFL teams don't give a damn about moral victories, but the 2022 Texans would take any victory they could get, and by taking Dallas and Kansas City down to the wire in weeks 14 and 15 of last year, then proceeding to go 2-1 in the final 3 games with wins over the Titans and Colts, leads me to believe this team not only has a lot of heart, as cliche as that sounds, but they're not going to give up. Ever. And this team had every incentive to last year, and granted players love playing for Lovie Smith, but I think it's going to be the same concept with DeMeco Ryans. And this is no shot at the 2022 Texans as much as it is to say, I don't think the roster could have got worse from last year to this year, but they improved the roster quite a bit this offseason, and it's not limited to just CJ Stroud and Will Anderson. I know losing 2022 first-round pick Kenyon Green was not an ideal way to start the year, but Kenyon allowed 47 pressures as a rookie last year and also allowed 4 sacks and had the second lowest pass blocking grade in all of football out of players who played at least 400 pass blocking snaps last year, and the lowest was his teammate Scott Quisenberry. And veteran Josh Jones will start this year, and obviously we wish Kenyon the best in the long run, as 2023 will truly be a now or never year for him. But all Josh Jones has to do in 2023 is not be the second worst lineman in all of football. That's it. And yes, there will be a learning curve at center for Jarrett Patterson, but I really liked the Texans' 2023 draft class, and there seems to be this belief that, oh, it's just the Texans, will kick their ass by double digits and move on, from opposing teams that is. And while, yes, I do think they will finish with less than 6 wins, and granted they will probably have a loss or 2 this year where they get blown out, as it happens to rebuilding teams, they're going to be a thorn in a lot of team sides because they're never going to give up. And as we saw last year, they can create turnovers. And if anybody takes this team lightly at any point, well, you might mess around and find out pretty quick that DeMeco Ryans is changing a culture that was long overdue. And DeMeco's focus over the next few years is going to be, well, obviously to win more games than 11 in 3 years, but it's also going to be focusing on not getting destroyed in the trenches. And obviously they needed their franchise quarterback, as we had 2 years of Davis Mills to know he's not the long-term guy, and to know you're not going to win a Super Bowl with him as the full 17-game starter. So to start the DeMeco era, they got their franchise quarterback and the franchise pass rusher, which is absolutely huge. And what also needs to be remembered with the Texans last year is they had one player have over 5 sacks, and that was Jerry Hughes, who had 9. And I like the Texans secondary, which is led by second-year players in Jalen Petrie and Derek Stingley Jr. And what's going to benefit Will Anderson and these guys in the secondary simultaneously is they're going to feed off each other over the course of the season. When the Texans have teams in obvious passing situations, Will is going to feast, and what will also need to be remembered is, yes, I do think Will Anderson will be a good player over the course of time, but the Texans at some point will have to acquire another pass rusher. And they will, but for the 2023 season specifically, from an expectation standpoint for Will Anderson, Aiden Hutchinson led the 2022 draft class with 53 pressures and 9.5 sacks, and that was a very, very good rookie season. And quite frankly, I'd be surprised if Anderson has that many sacks as a rookie, but 53 pressures is manageable. And what also has to be remembered in Hutch's case versus Will's case is Aiden probably will have more pass rushing snaps logged in 2022 than Will in 2023, because his team was more competitive than what I anticipate the Texans to be this year. And if Will has a disappointing season on the stat sheet from a sack standpoint and even a pressure standpoint, meaning he only has 3.5 or 4 sacks in his rookie year, I honestly would not be surprised, but I 100% believe in Will and think he will be a great player in DeMeco's defense. And DeMeco came from the 49ers and obviously knows pass rush is essential. And Will is just 22 years old, as he turned 22 earlier this month, and there's going to be inevitable transition period as he goes up against offensive linemen that not only have experience on him, but in pretty much every case have 50 or 60 pounds on him, and in some cases even more. So if I were a Texans fan, even for the Defensive Rookie of the Year award pertaining to Will Anderson, I'd hold my breath because he has a lot going against him. But that's okay, because a 2022 first-round pick named Derek Stingley Jr. had quite a transition year as well, which was due in some part to not using him in the right scheme, and it's also a part of playing corner in the National Football League. And for Houston's young core, these are guys that are 21, 22, 23, or even 24 years old. They're not 28 going on 29, and they're just simply not good. What a lot of the Texans roster honestly is your buddy starting a franchise in Madden and drafting all rookies and second-year players. Yes, they have their vets like Dalton Schultz, who I believe will be a good player for them this year, and a guy who I quietly think will have a very productive year. And yes, they have Laramie Tunsil, who will be critical for CJ Stroud's development, but a lot of the first year under DeMeco Ryans is going to be a lot of trial and error, and there's going to be quite a bit of error. But by season's end, like we saw last year, well, they play the Jets, Titans, Browns, and Titans again in 4 of their final 5 games, and I would not want to play this team around this time. And Bobby Slowick, the team's offensive coordinator, also comes over from San Francisco, and I do think second-year running back Dameon Pierce will rush for 1,000 yards this year and aid in CJ's development too. Just being completely honest here, I think the Texans are going to be 1-2 at best through 3 games with losses to the Ravens and Jags on the road, and I think you're going to hear chirping of things like setting CJ Stroud up to fail and things along these lines, but I really like what GM Nick Caserio has done for CJ entering his rookie year. Robert Woods and Dalton Schultz, while not elite, are good veteran options, and especially Schultz, who is a guy I like and think CJ will target early and often. Schultz is only 27, so while he is signed to a 1-year deal, I could easily see him having a 500 or 600 yard year with 6 or 7 touchdowns, and re-signing on a 2 or 3 year deal after the season ends. And from a stat sheet standpoint, for CJ in his rookie year, I think he can throw for 33 or 3,400 yards, along with 18 to 20 touchdown passes, and be off and running. Everyone was focusing on the Tank Dell draft pick and how good he was doing in the preseason, but I also really like the Xavier Hutchinson pick in the 6th round. We mentioned the defense needing to get better at the beginning of the video, and it's true, they do, and specifically the run defense, and they went out and signed Sheldon Rankins, who is a solid veteran defensive tackle. The signings of guys like Rankins, Noah Brown, Robert Woods, and Schultz will not turn the Texans from a 3-13-1 team to Super Bowl contenders. But what I refer to this team as in a lot of the weekly breakdowns last year was a AAA team competing in the MLB. And this offseason, what DeMeco and Nick Caserio's jobs was to get better for the 2023 season and to get better for the future as well. And they did exactly that. They had an excellent draft and supplemented in free agency. Rome was not built in a day, and neither was the Houston Texans rebuild. Yes, they're going to struggle at times this year, but they will eventually rise. But the Texans team MVP, breakout players, ceiling, and floor are on the screen, and I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please like the video and subscribe, as only about 24% of people watching are subscribed, and it makes a massive difference. Also, please check out Underdog Fantasy with the link in the description or by using code Garrett, and you will receive a free $100 deposit match, and with the sign up on Underdog, you will also receive a mystery pick'em, and what that means is you will receive a player prop to, maybe get like a half yard, like there was Patrick Mahomes in week 1, to throw for a single yard against the Lions. Obviously that cashed, so definitely check that out as you get a free $100 deposit match and a mystery pick'em. But until the next team preview, actually guys, we're done. That's the last team preview. I'm just so used to saying that. I really hope you guys enjoyed the series as much as I enjoyed making them, and I really appreciate the support. And I'll make a short about this, just thanking you guys for the support. But until the next video, which will be the week 1 breakdown, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.